I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Drain the swamp.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of Liberty Nation Swamponomics videocast. I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor. This week, shining a spotlight on Trumponomics 2.0. U.S. voters sent a direct and blunt message to Washington on Election Day. They hate inflation. The White House and the establishment press have rejected the public's concerns, alluding to solid GDP growth, inflation inching closer to the Federal Reserve's 2% target, and strong nominal, non-inflation adjusted wage growth. The people disagreed, with their personal finances viewed as worse than they were 4 years ago. This makes sense. Real hourly compensation and real median weekly earnings have been mostly negative since January 2021, and real income gains were lower than under the 45th president. But the left and the mainstream media have shrugged off this as the vibe session. As the punditry class perform an autopsy of the election results, it's time to look ahead to what another edition of Trumponomics will bring the American people. Please welcome our special guest, Patrice Onwuka, the director of the Center for Economic Opportunity at Independent Women's Forum. Thank you for appearing on our show today.
Terrific. Thanks for having me.
So first, just a quick autopsy of voters' views on the economy. I was watching this whole thing unfold for most of the night, and I saw two things on the exit polling data. It said that the public thought the economy was abysmal and their personal finances are worse than they were 4 years ago. Now, the mainstream media and the White House have kept talking about incessantly this glowing economic data. Inflation has come down to 2%. GDP is up 12% since 2021, and nominal wages, of course, non-inflation adjusted, are up bigly. But what's the difference between what voters perceive of the economy and what the data have shown?
Well, the difference is the everyday lived experience. You talk about real income versus nominal income. And while inflation, the rate has come down to 2.4, 2.5%, the price levels have not returned to their early 2021 levels, which means that you are spending 20 to 30% more for your essentials as well as the utility bills. Lop onto that, and I think people are feeling the impact of elevated interest rates, which the Federal Reserve used to fight inflation. Well, that means your car note is more expensive. Your any sort of consumer debt you have is suddenly more expensive. And so you're seeing American families have less disposable income. So right before the election, Gallup does their pessimism poll, so to speak, to find out where people are. And not surprisingly, high pessimism over the economy. And typically, when you have high pessimism, the incumbent does not win. And that's exactly what we saw this time around. I get that there are good measures, economic reading measures that people can point to every month. But if your entire financial outlook, your budget, which includes all of the expenses plus the income you have coming in, is reduced. And frankly, you're finding fewer opportunities to be able to earn extra side income because of government regulations, then you're going to hold accountable the people who are responsible for the high fiscal spending and the high, and that have driven the high cost. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I always point out that, it comes down to one thing. People hate inflation. You talked about recently, real hourly compensation, inflation adjusted, it's been mostly negative throughout the entire administration. Real median weekly earnings has been mostly negative. Even real retail sales have been flat, or you adjust the stock market for inflation. It barely pales in comparison to what happened under the Trump presidency. Now, with the repudiation of the current administration, what do you think voters now want with the incoming president, and will those wants be satisfied?
Well, from an economic standpoint, they're going to look for the president to cut those costs very quickly. I'm sure they'll give a grace period of a few months, but President Trump has run on the idea that drill, baby, drill is really going to be the key. Energy prices, to bring down energy prices and everything that's related to it. I think J.D. Vance did a really good job of connecting the dots between not just energy prices and the gas pump, but how the cost of energy feeds into every aspect of your life and your business, whether that's keeping your business door stores open and your buildings heated, to your home costs, to the fibers in your clothes very much rely on energy. And so when transportation costs, and so when everything is more expensive because of higher energy costs, then you're going to feel it. If you bring down the energy costs, then I think people will start to realize, okay, this is how this entire economy really does run on gas, on oil. And so that's where they're going to be looking for him to start. The tax cuts, I think that's agenda item number 1 or number 2, however he will prioritize it. People recognize that they're going to get a tax increase at the end of 2025 if Congress and the president don't do anything to extend the 2017 tax cuts. And so he promised, interestingly, tax cuts on lots of smaller demographics, whether you're talking about tax cuts on eliminating taxes on Social Security, overtime pay, taxes on tips. But it speaks to the larger point about the president-elect wants you to be able to keep more of your income, more of your finances, to be able to afford, the higher costs that are around right now. But also from a freedom perspective, it shouldn't be government that's deciding how much, where your money should go. It should be you determining where your money should go. So I think if he's able to tackle those two economic and then pair that with curbing the illegal immigration and actually starting to deal with the illegal immigration crisis, I think the American people will say promises that he made are going to be promises he kept.
Okay, actually, I want to touch on 3 of those issues you just mentioned. So I'll go with the first one, the oil. Now, a lot of people are unaware that the U.S. is actually producing a record amount of crude oil. The latest EIA data shows around 13.4 million barrels per day. So when you already have record output, what else can the administration do? I think I spoke to one energy strategist, and he said that if Trump's policies were enacted, you can increase production by 1 or 2 million barrels per day in the next couple of years. Is that feasible?
Maybe. I mean, so what President Trump is talking about is permitting reform, for example, not just the leases that need to and oil exploration in other parts of the country that have been on, public lands that have been off limits. But I think it's the idea that, a lot of the permitting reforms that allow that to happen, but also the investment that takes years for energy companies, for refineries to do, when they have certainty that over the next 4 years, they're not going to be a target A for the administration when it comes to regulations, they're more willing to invest in long-term oil production. The fact that we are producing high record levels of oil is despite or in spite of Biden regulations. And frankly, President Biden had to pull back on a lot of his day one regulations on the energy industry because he realized it was having such a negative impact on pricing. But it's despite the Biden administration, not because of. And so it's been interesting. I participated in a couple of hearings as a witness in the House, in a couple of different House committees, looking at energy costs and energy production this year. And that has really been the lesson, which is the U.S. is producing record levels despite over-regulation, not because of. So imagine if you release some of that regulation, what is possible? And maybe it's a million barrels, maybe it's significantly more.
Now, on the issue of taxes. Now, one of the near-term endeavors for the new administration and the new Treasury Secretary will be extending the expiring tax cuts and avoiding a debt default as a debt ceiling limit expires. Now, it seems like these two issues are intersect. One of the reasons why the Treasury yields has risen so much is they fear that America's fiscal health will deteriorate in the coming years and in falling tax revenue and a ballooning deficit. Now, do you think a second Trump term can reverse America's ailing fiscal health as he cuts taxes?
If not just tax cuts, I think it's a broader perspective on how we're dealing with the debt. The tax cuts are going to be important for pro-growth, particularly if he's able to, frankly, cut even more on the corporate side. And then one of the proposals is to reduce the corporate tax rate for those companies that produce goods in the United States, manufacturing companies. A lot of the work, though, is really going to be on the individual side and maybe the small business side. So that said, it's going to be expensive. So how is it going to be paid for? I think there's going to be a lot of horse trading. But if then tax cuts, taking that conversation off the table at the start of the Trump administration, the second half really of the administration really saying, okay, let's look at our national debt. Let's look at, number one, the biggest drivers, which we know tend to be are the entitlements. Where do we start to address this issue? Now, this is where it gets sticky, to be honest. President Trump has definitely said he's not going to touch Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, and that's really a political move. That said, we have now the DOJA, which is a potential new agency headed up by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, which is going to look to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. So that may make an impact. That should make an impact. But I really do want to see something done on the entitlements, because really that is where a lot of the growth in government has been. That said, though, COVID spending has been growing the federal government. The number of people who've been put on welfare programs at a time when unemployment they tell us, is at record lows. It makes us wonder, there probably are areas where we can scale back and right-size government that can have a long-term better impact on the fiscal health of the United States. That said, a lot of the President Trump's proposals on the campaign trail may accelerate the dates when Social Security becomes insolvent, maybe by a year or two. But when I'm a big laugher curve girl, and so I do believe that you can cut taxes to a certain point and still continue to see record revenue. And actually, we've seen that revenue has been significantly high, not because of all of the IRS agents under the Biden-Harris administration that are targeting small businesses and LLCs like many people in Washington have, but really because there's a certain amount of diminishing marginal returns when taxes reach a level that's too high.
Now, on the issue of immigration, one thing I really I've noticed over the past year, all these economists and even the Federal Reserve saying how important illegal immigration has been to the U.S. economy. It's one of the reasons why price pressures have diminished, and one of the reasons why the labor market has been so strong. Now, what's your take on that? I mean, do you really think that if Trump were to deport, let's say, 10 million illegal immigrants, that would really devastate the United States economy?
I don't believe it. And let me take apart this argument in a couple of ways. First off, they're saying the quiet part out loud, which is part of the reason to allow illegal immigration is to undercut the wages of American workers with cheap labor. That is wrong. I mean, I think that from an economic standpoint, we always do understand that illegal immigration, really targets low wage workers. And so how are you going to allow people into this country illegally so that they can, as Nancy Pelosi said, clean your bathrooms? I mean, that is morally wrong, and I think economically wrong. But number two, when you look at the fact that I understand illegal immigration is, helping to support the fertility rate or the rate at which the United States is growing. But that's not a good argument for a system that is breaking and putting heavier burdens on public resources. Now, let me just make an aside. I'm a naturalized citizen, meaning I came to this country from the Caribbean. My parents spent a lot of time and money to ensure that we abided by all the rules, did all of the paperwork, got all of the shots and vaccinations so that we can come here legally to this country. And when you permit illegal immigration under the guise of saving corporations money so that they could keep undercut wages for low wage workers, that argument really doesn't fly. Now, the mass deportation program that President Trump is planning on doing very early on, he's saying right now it's targeted at those illegal immigrants with criminal records, those who are violent offenders, those who are really a harm on the public safety. I doubt those people are actually contributing to the labor market by taking jobs. Those are probably the people who are stealing from legal citizens, stealing from naturalized citizens, stealing from other illegal immigrants who may be working. But those are the people that are really being prioritized here. And so deporting them, I don't think it's going to have such a negative impact on the economy.
Yeah, you see the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the gap between foreign-born workers and U.S.-born workers, and that thing has just really widened over the past few years. And with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they include both legal and illegal immigration. And before I let you go, talk about Jerry Nadler. He says, if not for illegal immigrants, who's going to pick the rotting produce? So that was his justification for keeping illegals in the country. So on that note, Ms. Onwuka, thank you very much for appearing on Swamponomics TV. It was a delight.
Thank you for having me.
From vanquishing inflation in the US economy to improving the federal government's fiscal position, the incoming administration will have a lot on its plate. Will the results be enough to satisfy the American people, or by the 2026 midterm elections, will it be, once again, the stupid economy? That's it for this week. Please read my full Swamponomics column on the pages of LibertyNation.com, and be sure to check out my previous Swamponomics TV videos and interviews. Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates or campaigns or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thank you.
I'm Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's economics editor.
Very, very rocky.
Death by government.
Drain the swamp.